Is this the real life? Is it just fantasy? Learn that today about Christianity. My name is Rogan, and you are watching The Mysterious Stoner in a Bowler. I see you have returned for more. Good. Because I have plenty more to share. In my previous video, we talked about the similarities between Christianity and a number of other older and simultaneously existing religions, mostly older. And I even discovered a few more before being able to get to making this video. I discovered a common similarity, a similar trend of gods coming down to teach humanity new things, out how to be better people and such of that nature, even technology and things, and medicines. This was consistent between the Egyptians, the Mayans. I believe the Zoroastrians had that as well. But among those same ones, they also believed in gods leaving humanity, and then that they would one day return. That is also consistent within the Mayans, which is, by the way, super old. Like we're talking in like 14,000 BC, before Christ, is when they were carving this sort of stuff into their temples. And a number of beliefs in addition to that not only believe the gods coming back, but they believe like an end, or like an ending time period. The Vikings call it Ragnarok. In Christianity, it's called the last days, or the tribulation period. Other religions have other names for it. The Zoroastrians have their own name. I mentioned them having that, but the Mayans had that as well, the gods coming back. And so that's just a few more for you to go look about. And there's probably even more you could find. But I will leave a link or two in the description below for you to follow, and you can hear more about that and some other interesting tidbits of information that we will not get into today. Today, we are going to move on to the making of Christianity, how it actually grew. There were complications with this religion, you see. I've had a little bit better time to think about how to explain it better, because it is a difficult thing to understand when you don't understand Christianity and how many different perspectives there are that have been tied into it, or the history along with it. So there's a couple reasons I would like to mention before diving in why it wouldn't be popular at first, due to the religion, some of the things within the religion itself, but also a couple things as to why it could grow in some popularity. So first of all, why it wouldn't be popular, why it had a difficult time growing. Well, in the previous video I mentioned briefly that there's a stigma within Christianity that came from the monotheistic religions that it originated from, that is the Hebrew religion, the Jewish religion. They're very they're very much of the mind that there is only one God and all other gods are false, or if there are any beings that call themselves gods, they're demons, they're lesser beings. They're not equal to the supreme God that they in their religion worship. So Christianity kind of has the same idea with that, and they don't want to conform to other religions, but they pull from other religions, these which we talked about, all these other different pagan ideas, bringing them in the communion, we didn't talk about it too much, but the sonship, there was a lot of sun god worship back in the old times, and the sun was often worshipped or seen as a god, a thing to be prayed to and sacrificed to, and that eventually translated over time into being a god separate from the literal sun. And so but the sun was still continued to be worshipped. There were gods of the sun, like the Apollo sun god. The thing about the pagans, the people that Christianity pulled all these different ideas from, was that, and this is not true of all pagan beliefs, we are talking about the ones of that time, there was a general consensus, not among all, because there were many different kinds of religions, but generally among pagans, it was accepted that there were many gods, even more than the ones you as an individual pagan might worship. That was perfectly acceptable. You never had to even know all the names of the other gods. You never had to worship all the other gods. There were certain ones that you could choose, or ones that you would, or that you would go to for certain specific requests for certain situations, depending on what that god was a god of, what that god specialized in. And like when the Romans conquered other gods, other nations, this became a very easy way to pull in more people to be more willing subjects of the Roman Empire. That way they could have people still worshiping their own gods and not feel religiously oppressed. And so they were expected to act like all the gods of Rome were real, but they could pray to whatever god they wanted. So when Christianity began, the Jews weren't popular because they weren't accepting of the other gods. When Christianity showed up with all these attributes, much like the pagan beliefs, but saying, well, no, we're not with the Jews because we're the next level of that. The Messiah showed up, and that's who we believe in. But we're not with the other pagans either, because all their gods are false. We're not allowing them to come into contact, because all other gods are false, and underneath our Holy Trinity, that also did not come from the Jews. That was also happened to be a pagan trait. But we talked about that in the last video. So they kind of made themselves unpopular with this concept. But there was an even bigger one. There's a philosophical point of Christianity that is largely accepted by pretty much all Christians, and that is the concept of sin. It is a massive part for them, because without the belief in sin, to them, sin is something we are born with. It's like an inherited disease, like being born with AIDS, basically. That's how they see it. They think that the reason we make mistakes as humans, the reason we mess up and we're not perfect, and the reason we give into our more negative emotions and lose control and all that is not because of the situations and stresses and all that stuff, those natural worldly occurrences that can affect us and make us be that way. Not our traumas and scars and things of life that affect us. No, the reason why we fail and we are not perfect humans is because we have this disease called sin. And that is what makes us unable to get along. They have created this disease. It is a concept from the Bible, but personally I think they've got it all wrong. I don't believe in such a thing as sin anymore. My beliefs on it, on the reason why humans make mistakes are quite a bit different. I believe it's much more natural than what they give it, than what they credit, but we're not talking about my beliefs today. We're talking about Christianity. And so the whole idea of pulling people into Christianity is, you are sick, you are not good enough for God. You will be forever flawed because your ancestor Adam sinned, and because of him, even if you live a perfect life, you cannot get into heaven. You are not enough. You will never be good enough. You will never be great. You will never be good. There is none good but God. That's a huge point in Christianity. You are shit because you are corrupted by sin. And so you don't deserve to be in heaven, and there's nothing you can do on your own. That's the other part of Christianity. They offer you this salvation through Jesus, which that is the whole thing. Their winning tactic is Jesus. He makes everyone feel more love and compassion and makes everyone treat each other nicer, which that's not entirely true. It's his teachings if you actually follow them, and you don't have to be a Christian and go to church to follow those particular beliefs that are actually good. And those good beliefs aren't just in the Bible either. They're in other places. Spread the word. And go look for them yourself. They're in other religions and even outside of religions. But Christianity, it tends to beat people down. Without beating people down, it breaks them down, and then it gives them a way to build themselves up in the way the religion tells them to be. It doesn't give you the opportunity to be your true free self. It says you can only be your true free self under Christ. But that's their belief. The reason why, other than telling you you're an inherently terrible person from birth, aside from that being an unattractive concept to be told, a lot of pagan beliefs, they don't necessarily tell you the opposite. Some of them don't even preach of an afterlife. But a lot of them, Norse paganism, for example, are all about promoting the individual, about the individual finding strength within themselves and building themselves up, using their mistakes and their flaws to learn from them and learn how to do better and to steadily improve themselves over time. And this isn't even a religious tactic. This is also it's connected. It's still always going to be connected to the religious aspects, but you can find these being taught as well in martial arts. A lot of martial arts teaches self-control, the self-respect, the respect of others. Bruce Lee made his own martial arts, and he had a lot of teachings. He did not teach religion. He taught embracing failure, learning from it, and learning to move with the way things are in life, learning to roll with the punches, learning to pick yourself back up again, to not let your failures beat you down, but to overcome them yourself. So you can kind of see, with these negative aspects of Christianity, why it wouldn't be as popular. They're calling all other gods false, whereas a pagan says, well, I only worship these 4 or 5 gods, but you worship these other gods. I don't even know who they are, but that's fine. They're probably real too. I'm happy with mine. You're happy with yours. They probably all exist in the same universe. Cool. But when with the Christians, it was like, no, your God is a demon. If it's not of my God, then it's of the devil, and you shouldn't be worshiping it. Well, they weren't all like that. Some of them were nicer about it. Some of them didn't condemn other people, but at the core belief, that is the way they believe, that all other gods are false and wrong and are not to be accepted and gone after or worshipped or to a lot of Christians not even considered or looked at or studied even. Which is kind of unfortunate, because there are a lot of nice gods in a lot of different religions, even if they're not real. A lot of them are even nicer than the ones in the Bible, but you'd have to do your own research to find out about that. So, those are the reasons why Christianity would not be as popular. Why would it actually grow from its own work? We're still in the early stages here, where Christianity is, well, we'll get to the persecution part in a moment. But going off of strictly word of mouth, why would people accept Christianity? As I said yesterday, they've borrowed a lot of it from pagan beliefs, so a lot of good qualities are automatically going to be within Christianity, and those do automatically draw people who want to improve themselves and make themselves better. If they see a good quality person who happens to be a Christian, of course that person will attribute it to themselves being a Christian and not themselves just being a good person. And that non-Christian will see that, and they will also think to attribute the goodness of that believer to their beliefs. So that is one of the key things that I believe is a real reason, because you can have genuinely good people who are Christians, and they advertise their beliefs very well. You can have that in every single religion. But another reason I came across, and not on purpose at all either, but the fellow Nietzsche was a huge critic of Christianity, and I did a little digging about his opinion on the subject, and he had an opinion I thought was very, very fascinating, and that was, with Christianity, the concept of heaven and hell for the sinners, or all the underdogs. That's the thing about Christianity. It appeals to the underdogs a lot, because it says that when people get saved, it's a lot easier for poor people to be saved. There was a lot of poor people back in the day, lots of slaves and everything like that. So with people getting saved, they'd be taken to heaven someday. They'd have this wonderful paradise, extremely wonderful afterlife compared to their terrible, terrible time of living as slaves or and whatever else they had to deal with in poverty back in those days. Can't imagine what it was like. But Jesus said it was harder for how did that verse go? It was easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So for a lot of poorer people who were slaves and who were in a terrible position in life with a lot of oppressors over them, especially people who were oppressed by the Romans, because they did a lot of conquering, people who might have a grudge against the Romans, these better, well-off people, in a sense, by believing on Jesus, people were putting their faith that this God was going to save their poor selves and get revenge for their sake on the aristocrats, the wealthy, the Romans of their day. Even if it wasn't in a physical sense, which a lot of them wanted, even on a spiritual sense, on a psychological sense, it made them feel better because it helped them bear the punishment of their day to think, oh, it's fine, I can take this punishment, I can live my life for Christ, because one day I'm going to be on the top, and the bastard beating me is going to be in hell, and I'll be laughing at him. I don't believe all Christians were like this. This is simply an observation by the Russian writer Nietzsche of Christianity. And I don't agree with all of his aspects, but I thought that was a fascinating perspective that I had never heard before. And then, of course, the final reason why people would join Christianity, aside from being a rather rebellious religion, at least in spirit, if nothing else, then it was simply the fact that it was a new religion, and that it combined so many of these other aspects heard of before into just this nice looking bouquet of new ideas. And nothing gains popularity like something new, especially if it's brand new. And this was, I mean, all the beliefs we talked about in the previous video, all wrapped up together with this guy Jesus who supposedly did nice things, and like you've got the whole deal. You've even got a whole Jewish religion, Old Testament, that even though the God isn't really at all like Jesus himself and doesn't really make a great connection, you know, you throw that in there and you've got yourself a whopping colossal bouquet of beliefs. And then if you don't even write your holy book and actually put it together for, what was it? When was the first book? 1539, I believe it was. It was something like that. An incredibly long... Oh, it was over 1,000 years that God waited to have the Bible compiled. But previous video. You can see I enjoy talking about this. But now, so we have seen why Christianity would not be accepted and be accepted back in those days. So let's get on to how the heck it blew up, because this is a very conflicting issue of beliefs that beat you down and tell you you are a terrible being from birth with no hope within yourself, to, well, it's new and it's got a lot of these other nice ideas, and you know, these people are they're pretty devoted in attitude to their religion. So that's, you know, and that's always something in and of itself to admire, even if they're dead wrong. So, of course, there was growth, but there was going to be conflict as well. And conflict is really where things began. Christianity was growing. But this was during the time of the Caesars. And right at the very beginning, it was a rough beginning indeed. It all began with the burning of Rome. The current Caesar was Nero. He had a few loose screws in his head. And because Christianity just so happened to sound rather rebellious, spiritually, physically, it didn't matter to the government if it sounded a slight bit radical. Perfect for him. He set Rome on fire and blamed it on the Christians, and so that immediately increased Christianity's infamy and popularity. And because the Romans had just so wonderfully made the highways, the very first highways of the world, well, they didn't get all the Christians at once, obviously. But thanks to those roads, Christianity just spread all over the empire in all different directions. And so, of course, Christianity was persecuted for a bit. And that helped keep people moving, kept the Christians moving about. Of course, that's, like, it didn't change at all for a good while. The religion still managed to grow, but it wasn't exploding yet. Everyone knew about it, but it was, if you were a Christian, you keep that on the down low. But it was still increasing. It was new. Because it was new, it was going. And its other good enough attributes. And it got to a point to where it grew in number, and to where it still wasn't massive yet, because it wasn't legal. It was actually made an illegal religion and outlawed. It stayed that way for 300 years. It was an illegal religion. That is, until an emperor by the name of Constantine came along. And this is one of Christianity's favorite historical stories right here. Constantine had a battle in 312 AC, so about 312 years after Jesus. And in this battle, this very historical battle, because he was fighting for dominance over all of Rome with another, I believe he was a general. He was a general or another Caesar, but anyways, it was his primary rival, and they were fighting over a bridge. And according to the story, the night before the big battle, Constantine has a dream, a vision, where Jesus comes to him and basically tells him the gospel in his dream, or something of that nature, but then and says to believe on him, and that if he does so, he'll win the war. And so Constantine goes and paints crosses on all the shields and all the banners of his army, and he wins the war, the battle, and eventually the war. That is what Christians and Catholics will tell you, because that is all they were told. You see, Constantine, he had that battle in 312, and it was such a monumental victory that he built an arch in Rome called Constantine's Arch. He named a lot of things after himself. But he built this arch in commemoration of this great victory. And so if he won this great victory in the name of Christ and painted crosses on his banners and his soldiers' shields, then on this arch that he had built after his battle, there should have been crosses all over it, right? There should have been many commemorations made to God. There should have been like a vision of Jesus appearing somewhere, or something. There should have been like a figure of Jesus, perhaps even. Well, there's not a single sign of Christianity on that arch. You can go there and look at it, or you can watch the link in the description below, because there's a whole video about it. I'm getting much of my information of this story from the people who are paid to do this research for a living. Unlike a lot of Christians who just stop with what they are told. As it turns out, emperors had to win over their own soldiers, as well as their enemy soldiers that they captured. And there are archaeological discoveries made. A lot of this is in the video that I'm sharing with you. Archaeological discoveries made that prove there were Christians both in Constantine's army, but even more in his enemy's army. Not only did Constantine broadcast his victory vision, in addition to this, Constantine actually slandered his enemy to say that he was a terrible pagan ruler and that he persecuted Christians. But as it turned out, if you study history, the real history, because there were other documents made, Constantine did not manage to erase all evidence of how things actually were. Turns out that other pagan tyrant king was actually a pretty nice fellow who left Christians alone. Probably why he had more Christians in his army than Constantine. Also probably because it was Constantine, this is Constantine Jr. we're actually talking about. Constantine's dad persecuted Christians. So that may have something to do with Christians not being as into Constantine Jr.'s army quite so much. Constantine also had to win over the officers of the armies. There was a very popular cult among the Roman officers of the time, and it was only for officers and above, aristocracy, a very aristocratic cult. For men only, I don't know if I said that. They would meet literally right next door to where the Christian soldiers would meet. They have archaeological evidence of this as well. It was called Mithraism. The cult of Mithras. Its god was Mithras. It was a sun god. I mentioned that earlier. So the Apollo god was being worshipped at the time. So was this god, another sun god. Featured with a halo, which tends to show up in a lot of modern Christian art. And it was all about regenerating the universe by bloodshed. A literal inscription of the cult of Mithras says, "And thou hast saved us by the shedding of the eternal blood." Sound familiar? They also partook in bread and wine as part of their rituals, and they even celebrate Mithras' birthday on December 25th, which was the end of the Roman Saturnalia, which just so happened to last for 12 days and involved the giving of gifts. Ladies and gentlemen, your origin of Christmas. What's also crazy, just to add to that, is that they had their own special Smurfy-looking hats. For real, I'm not even kidding. It's in the video. Go watch that link. After this video's over, you're going to have a fun time. There's going to be other videos for you to watch too. They had these Smurfy-looking hats called Phrygian Caps that their priests wore. Even Mithras wore one himself. Now, why am I mentioning this? You'll see the evidence for it in the video too if you watch it. Why is it crazy? Because in the old church of Saint Apollinaire, if I'm pronouncing that right, Apollinaire Nuovo in Italy, it shows three magi, the three wise men, coming to visit and give gifts to Jesus. And they are shown wearing the exact same hats. It's why they're called magi in the first place. Because they were from the East, where this specific religion originated, and they wore the exact same hats. They were coming to give gifts to the sun god. And what ties it even more so is that on the Arch of Constantine, the one he built dedicated to his victory that Jesus supposedly granted him, not only does Constantine have pagan symbols all over, including several pagan gods surrounding him like they're protecting him on the battlefield, on the arch. In addition to that, there are 8 monk-like figures carved, statues, full-size statues, bigger than all the rest, carved onto this arch with Smurf hats, Phrygian caps. So what's the deal with Constantine here? He's saying he had a vision. Christians and Catholics say he had a vision and that he won this vision through Christ. But then he goes and he makes this arch and commemoration that is full of pagan symbolism. Something doesn't quite seem to line up here. Well, as it turns out, the battle happened 13 years before Constantine ever mentioned the vision. It wasn't until 325 that Constantine gathered the leaders of the church, gave them a feast. It was right before he was going to die that he proclaimed that he was a Christian, that he made Christianity legal, and he attributed doing this to the fact that he had this vision that helped him win this historic final battle in his conquest. That it was truly Jesus who gave him the victory, and so that with his last breath, Constantine was giving back to Jesus, or to Christianity. 13 years he waited to talk about it, right before he died. And funny thing about that whole ordeal, he had a trusted advisor within the leaders of the Christian church. I said the Christian church was growing, remember? Not super big, but big enough to where they were starting to appoint their own leaders without a Bible, completed Bible. So I don't know how the heck they were successfully pulling that off, but they were, and some of them made buddies with the emperor, because that's not suspicious whatsoever at all. 13 years after this fact, when Constantine decides he wants to legalize Christianity all of a sudden. But he made friends with this church leader. I have his name here. Eusebius. He was a trusted advisor within the leaders of the church. And he was conveniently the only person who wrote about Constantine's personal life. The only person who did the biography on Constantine. And the only person who wrote about this vision. And he didn't even actually write it down until after Constantine was already dead. And I haven't read them myself because there's so much to read, so much to do in life. The people who have, the historians who have read the books that Eusebius has written, that he wrote about Constantine, they said he came across as incredibly biased and embellished a lot of qualities of Constantine, to the point that they said, to the point of making some people who have read his other works ask, is this the same guy? Is this Eusebius that wrote all this other stuff, is it really the same guy who's writing about Constantine? Because this doesn't really seem to line up with his style or his attitude. Of course, it would serve someone in such a political and public position to not say anything bad about the deceased emperor, of the entire Roman Empire. One of the greatest proportional empires of all time. You're really gonna write a book and say anything bad about this guy, especially after he legalized your religion. So, a religion that's super similar to many other older and coexisting religions, which has not yet made a single agreed upon official collection of its teachings, and has been staying alive by sheer willpower, Roman roads, and the curious and bandwagon riders of the day become suddenly legal, virtually overnight, because the emperor claimed to have a vision that only one guy recorded, where archaeology shows the exact opposite, making the vision look super bogus. But that's the fact of it. And now, Christianity is not only allowed to legally exist, but is backed by the government, and no less due to a very, very shady claim. God works in mysterious ways, though, right? So surely, if Constantine was lying, God was going to use the government to lovingly spread his message to the world, right? He wouldn't allow the government to use his religion in whatever ways they wanted to justify manipulating, abusing, or killing innocent people, right? Right? The God of this religion wouldn't allow that if it was real. Well, let's be fair. Yes, Christian missionaries became more popular, being directly supported by the government. And yes, good actions and giving to the poor and needy has always been part of Christianity's teachings, as well as many other older religions. And as much as they tend to demonize beliefs that they don't agree with, they were not being forceful in pushing their own beliefs on others. At least not at first. But it's something important to remember here, that there have always been different sects of Christianity, different groups, different denominations. You can even find evidence of this in the Bible. The Apostle Paul talking crap about some guy Christians were following that he personally didn't agree with. Today, there are over 200 denominations just in the US of different kinds of Christianity. All over the world, there's over 45,000 different Christian sects. So to say that Christians have a hard time agreeing with each other is a bit of an understatement. And they had 300 years before becoming legal, so I didn't know if they killed any other of their fellow Christians or non-Christian. Oh, yes, they did. Let me just share it with you real quick, because it's in the Bible, of all places. Yes, Christianity begins with death. Didn't you know? Oh, not just the death of Jesus. There is other death too. Peter, yes, the Apostle Peter, calls on God to kill a Christian couple for lying about how much money they put in the offering plate. But aside from Trigger Happy Peter, for the next 300 years, as far as we know, they got along perfectly well with each other. In 380 AD, just 55 years after Christianity had been made legal by Constantine, a religious law called the Edict of Thessalonica was issued, saying that the sect of Nicene, they were going to be called the Catholics, they were the only true Christians of the great state church of the Roman Empire, and that all other versions of Christianity were considered heresies of foolish madmen. And it authorized legal punishments from forbidding those different Christian sects from having places to worship in the cities, forbidding them from ordaining priests and church leaders, forbidding them from spreading their beliefs. And then, in 385, they executed their first victims. It was a Spanish bishop by the name of Priscillian, for believing slightly differently and for practicing sorcery. Only 60 years now of Christianity being legal. And what do the representatives of a supposedly all-loving, just, understanding, and merciful God do to the first person they disagree with? Kill him. That's what they do. That is their decision. Oh, and his followers, because he had a few that agreed with him. So first him, and then his followers were executed as well. Even though he's one of their own that they allowed into the position, literally within their own sect of Nicene Catholic. He was one of them. Amazing how both in the Bible and in history, the first people Christians kill are their own. That should tell you something about the religion. Talk about a bad omen of things to come. Because things only escalated from there. Eventually, in 439 AD, forced conversions became the law. Initially, they were only going after the Jews because they blamed the Jews for killing Jesus, even though he was Jewish himself. And it wasn't the same everywhere because, of course, they didn't all completely agree to the same degree, but anti-Semitism was a huge thing back then. It became big in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, the Byzantine Empire, and many other places. It even took place during the Crusades. In 1096, on the way to Jerusalem, Jews were attacked in different towns along the way in what is known as the Rhineland Massacre. They were forced to convert, and many of them killed themselves instead of preferring to convert. And of course, in addition to that, Muslims were eventually hunted and forced to convert or executed as well. In fact, it didn't just happen during the Crusades. Jews and Muslims were a primary focus of the Spanish Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition, they existed from 1478 to 1834. 56 years longer than the amount of time that Christianity had been an illegal religion. And if you study the tactics and the methods behind the Spanish Inquisition, then read up on the Gulag Archipelago, which is an eyewitness accounts. It is a collection of eyewitness accounts about the corruption under the USSR communist era Stalin government. You will find a disturbing number of similarities, from kidnapping style to how they questioned victims, even some similar tortures, amongst a handful of other things. And I'll leave a link to those below, a link to descriptions of the Spanish Inquisition, what they were into, what they were after, and a volume to the first book of Gulag Archipelago. It will take you some time to get through into that book. It's a thick, heavy book, but it's worth your time reading. It's very, very good. But that was the Spanish Inquisition. It seems like the communist leaders of those days took some notes from the Spanish Inquisition in how they did some of their work and how they convinced people to confess to those who were pretending to be Christians. They had a huge thing for finding out Jews who were still practicing Judaism while pretending to be Christians or Muslims. What about the other religions, the non-Abrahamic faiths? Did they get persecuted as well? Oh, yes, they did. I'm not exactly sure when it started, but we can say for sure, at the very least, that it began in 750 AD with King Charlemagne. As it was suggested, it may have been an idea of Constantine, but it was most definitely an idea of King Charlemagne's to unite all of his country in one religion. So the thing about Christianity is that it promoting the leader of the country and that the Christians are living in. So this would be a great way, if you have all the people in your country believing the same religion that supports the leader, whoever the leader is, because that leader is appointed by God, that's that much more support for you as the king. So Charlemagne, to get as much support as he could possibly have, he decided to try and convert all the rest of the Germanic areas, where all the Saxons were. And how did he do this? Did he send out missionaries to preach? Well, I don't know if he actually did or not. But if he did, they were not converting nearly fast enough, because he decided, fuck it, we're going to go to war. And he went to war with them for 30 years. At the end of the 30 Years' War, there was a huge massacre. He had 4,500 of the enemy troops slaughtered because they wouldn't convert. So he killed them all. And that was the end of the war. And then 2 years later, in 785, Charlemagne declared that anyone who didn't convert or follow the church's sect of Christianity was to be executed. And I would love to read this to you, but it's a little long, so I'm just going to post it up on the screen here so it's easier for you to remember, and I'll have a link in the description below for you to follow it to, but I want you to look at this edict written by the church. It is called the Spanish Requirement of 1513, delivered by the Catholic Church, given to the Crusaders when they were going to the New World to find gold, to talk to the native indigenous tribes of the Mayans and the Aztecs that they were going to go visit. And this Spanish requirement talks about how they believe they have the right to come right in and preach their truth to the native people, and to do whatever they want to the native people if the native people do not convert and go along with their demands. Spanish Requirement of 1513. It's so much fun to read. I wish I could read it to you, but we are running short on time today. Now, outside of the irrefutable existence of these edicts, threats, and recordings of wars and forced conversions, because these things did not happen all at once or all in the same place, Christians and Catholics will always otherwise say that it was a peaceful growth of their religion. And you will find the descendants of the persecuted pagans saying it was even worse than what history reveals. But regardless of personal opinions, there are still two ways Christianity was spread that I haven't talked about yet. One of them I'm going to mention right now. It became very popular during the Viking Age. I'm sure a number of you people are aware of it, but sometimes it was a result after much bloody conflict, and sometimes there were some uprisings afterwards, or even peaceful pagans practicing in secret that had to be punished, but who's counting and caring about the little guys? If it meant peace, or the other guy was super rich, and the church always has been, converting could be irresistible. So much so that it played a really, really big part in ending the entire Viking Age. Half the reason Vikings were being Vikings was because where they were from, the land wasn't easy to farm. And so they either had to trade, or if they didn't have anything to trade, they had to go steal something to have worth trading. And that became a big part of how they lived. And then once they got better at it, good enough at it over time, they made it over to England, where they started raiding there. They liked their lands and started settling over there. The Vikings they got all over the place. But it became very convenient. And since Rome had disintegrated into these different kingdoms, Christianity was still a largely popular religion at that time. And so, if you wanted to form a strong alliance with someone who was more powerful than you and could help you in times of war, or could offer you shelter and things of that nature, you could do favors for each other and things like that, one of the primary ways of sealing the deal was through shared religion. And yes, there were still pagans who practiced in secret, and they had to be crushed over time, because that's how the Catholic Church ended up operating. The last way that Christianity spread, I will have to save for the next video. But you'll want to come back for that one too, because it is also consisting of persecution. But it's not persecuting Jews or Muslims or even heathens. Come back to find out who the Christians were persecuting, to find out the last way that they ended up spreading themselves out, and how they got themselves kicked out of the government. Until next time, my friends, stay safe and farewell.